Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Women in Recruitment Get Inspired, where today we have the pleasure of speaking to Jill Bassett. Jill is Board Director and Operations Director at Manpower. She's got a great background. Jill, I think you and I have been in the industry about the same length of time, so yeah. A couple of the more mature ladies on the call today. So it's a real pleasure to have you join us, and thank you for being our last guest on the Get Inspired series this year. For the audience, we will be chatting to Jill about her experiences and hopefully helping you see some of the learns and lessons that she's had during the course of her career. She's a great inspirational role model for what can be achieved in our industry. So I hope you'll field some questions through to me that I can put to Jill as we speak. If you could please send them through on the chat box, that would be really helpful, because then I've got everything in one place. And do just pop them in as you think of them, and I'll try and weave them into the conversation with Jill today. So Jill, just to start, maybe I could ask you to give us a bit of background, please, on your illustrious career.
Yeah, pleasure. And thank you for inviting me on today. It's a great pleasure to share and talk to everybody. So gosh, I joined the world of recruitment back in 1997. But it wasn't my plan to work in recruitment, and I think that's probably quite a common theme, isn't it, really?
Definitely. It wasn't mine either, Jill, you're right.
Yeah, so my ambition from school years was to be a teacher, and that was we walk into the careers office and they talk to us about what we should do, and that was my chosen career. I always wanted to teach children. Applied to university and actually completed a Bachelor of Education degree. So I had 4 years of teaching experience, which was quite eye-opening, and also a very, very good learning experience, actually.
I can imagine it prepared you for the next stage in your career, I'm sure.
It did, and I think this is the thing that I always think about. You know, wherever you find yourself, you always take some really good lessons from that. And you know, I've never been one to regret anything. I always think if you have an opportunity, you should take it and see where that takes you in your career. And certainly from a teaching perspective, it helped me to learn how to plan very well. When you stood in front of a classroom of 30 children, you can imagine they're quite severe critics, and they don't wait politely until the end of your session to say anything. You know, they'll quite happily interrupt. So you need to be very good at planning. You also need to be very good at presenting, and also managing a group of people. So I think they're the three takeaways for me from a transferable skill. It did really teach me how to be prepared, and also how to work with a lot of unruly individuals.
You've never been back there again, I'm sure.
Never, not at all. So I think, sorry, go on.
Do you end up in the recruitment world then, Jill?
So I then fell into the world of retail, actually. So I then ended up being a regional manager for an old clothes brand called Richards, which some people may or may not remember. It was part of the Sears women's wear group, and it was very much, you know, formal suits and that sort of thing. And I covered the northeast and Yorkshire area for them. And then one day I saw an advert in a publication called The Grocer. And it was for a branch manager to work for Manpower in Newcastle. So I thought, why not? Why not try that out? Give it a change in career. I'd been in retail then for 5 years. And then actually there wasn't a branch manager's job. It was just to get some talent pipelined for the company. And I ended up going to do the job of a consultant, recruitment consultant, looking after a large pharmaceutical brand in the northeast, and that was very interesting, and I learned an awful lot, and actually had to use a computer for the first time, so that was a bit of
that too.
Yeah, a bit of a learning curve. And actually, instead of dealing with customers as I was in retail, or children as a teacher, I was then dealing with business people and going out and selling our product to them rather than waiting for customers to come to me. So again, it was a bit of a, step outside of your comfort zone and learn how to deal with a completely different industry and different group of people. And then eventually walked into the branch manager's job, which was very exciting. And we had a big team in Newcastle. We had about 20 consultants then. And then moved into area management again for ManpowerGroup after that. So yeah, it almost everything fell into place. I think I was quite fortunate in the way that, the opportunities came up, and I then was prepared to take them rather than wait to be offered them. I always stuck my hand up and said, I'll have a go at that.
I think that's a good takeaway, if and worth probably flagging, because I think most people I've spoken to over this series have said, like yourself, Jill, don't sit and wait.
Yeah.
Part of the journey is about you putting your hand up and stepping forward when you see the opportunity, and not sort of sitting there waiting for someone necessarily to tap you on the shoulder.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you'll be surprised how many people don't stick their hand up and offer, that they would be more than happy to take the next step. So absolutely. What you don't realize is the person who you say you want to take the next step to probably wanted you to do that anyway, and they were just waiting for you to put yourself forward. So yeah, it's certainly something that I took. If you want to do something, you must put yourself forward for it.
You're right, and it's quite interesting that you say that, actually, because I always remember my old boss actually very, very clearly said to me when I sort of challenged, I suppose, where my career was going, and it absolutely, as you said it, he said to me, but hang on, you never told me what you wanted, and your peers, who happen to be male, they're all telling me.
Yeah.
So sorry that I didn't think of you, but if you'd have told me, I might have done. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was a little bit gobsmacked at the time, but then I realised, well, actually, this is how it is. This is then how I've got to learn to navigate my way through. And yeah, I'm quite capable of saying what I want, so I should feel empowered to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you do that, the more confidence you then gain to do that again and again, don't you? And step outside of your comfort zone.
And why? How did you end up in a board position, Jill? And what was it that you were? What was the sort of ambition and purpose that you were trying to fulfil as you looked to move further up? What was exciting you?
Yeah, so I think to start with, you don't think about that, where you want to get to in a company necessarily. You want to enjoy the job first of all, don't you? And build your team and be successful. And ManpowerGroup being such a huge corporate company, there are many opportunities. So there's lots of ways you can develop your skills, different parts of the company with different brands. So I went from working for our traditional Manpower branch network, then through to our key accounts network, where we were starting to look at larger enterprise solutions, and actually looking at how we started to deliver MSP and RPO solutions. So, once we started to get into that larger delivery, your whole world then starts to open up with new possibilities. And at the time, I guess I'd worked for Manpower for about 16 years at this point, and I looked after a large area, lots of large accounts as an operations manager. And I was really ready for the next step. So I felt that I'd, cut my teeth in that role, and we had a really successful team. I had a successor lined up. So, that's one thing I would say is very important. Make sure you've got very capable people in your team who are ready to take that next step, so that doesn't hold you back as well. And don't be afraid to share all of your knowledge. I've often found that, or experienced different managers through time who don't share knowledge because they believe that knowledge is power. But if your team know as much as you do, then you will be much more successful and you'll work much more closely together. So it's really important to impart that knowledge. So I got to that stage where I thought, right, what next? really wanted to be one of the directors, could see that, you know, to actually sit on a board and have a voice and actually be influential in the way that you take your brand and the company forward in the marketplace was very important to me. So not just the area that I worked in, but actually the whole group, and make sure that we were successful and, you know, we continued to lead in the marketplace. But unfortunately, there was a very well established board at that time who were very successful, and, you know, nobody was going to go anywhere. So, you know, it's that old scenario of, I really want to do that job, but how long do I need to wait to do that job? And then an opportunity came up for me outside of ManpowerGroup with Recruit Group, Japanese company, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And they offered me a director's role to run their whole solutions organization. So Advantage XPO is that brand. So I ran all of their MSP and RPO accounts. And I did that for 3 years. So I actually took the big step. It was quite hard to do at the time, but to leave a company that, you know, I was really dedicated to through and through, but to get that experience, I knew that I had to step outside and get some outside experience to ultimately get where I wanted to be.
And that obviously paid off for you then, didn't it?
It did, because 3 years later, I met with my old MD from previous years, and he asked if I would come back to the group and take up a director's role then, and I absolutely was happy to do so. I think, you know, I loved the years working for Recruit and Advantage XPO, and it was certainly a very good learning experience. And I think it helps you be more of a rounded individual to step outside and work for a different company as well and get a different perspective, because you can become very siloed and just have one view. So that helped broaden my knowledge of the recruitment industry and how other companies worked and navigate, you know, the marketplace. But ultimately, to go back and have an opportunity then to be part of the ManpowerGroup board was ultimately, you know, something that I'd always wanted to do, and it was very attractive to do so. So I said yes, please, and I went back to ManpowerGroup for 2 years. I did a workforce solutions director role, and then after those initial 2 years, I then got the place on the board. So it was very much, you know, going back in and sharing knowledge and making sure that, you know, you're the right person to do that job, because you know, you might want to do it, but what are you actually going to contribute once you get to that position?
And again, I was talking to somebody yesterday actually about the concept of thinking about where you want to get to, and do you stay in the organisation you're in? Do you look to go outside if that doesn't seem to be present where you are currently? And it was interesting that you picked up on the going outside to get experience, and it might be worth dwelling on that for a little while actually, because like you, I spent 25 years, well, I know you stepped out, I didn't. I stayed 25 years at S3, but I stayed actually because I managed to weave my way through the organisation, and I think I achieved similar to what you achieved by stepping out, by navigating and placing myself in different positions in the business, because like you, I was very much aware that if I didn't broaden my skill set and create more value in myself, then it might be that I wouldn't get that next job or be good enough or capable for you know, the positions I wanted to go for. And so I think there'll be a number of people probably listening today that are in that same place where they're maybe thinking, can I stay where I am, or should I stay, or should I go? And it's probably the right answer is only relevant to your own situation, isn't it? And it's probably the advice I think you and I would give is just be mindful of where those areas are that you aren't getting developed in, and how you're going to find ways to broaden your own experiences, whether that's in your organisation or through the activities you undertake, through things you do outside of work, isn't it, as much as what you do in your job?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think sometimes you can sit and think, well, the company aren't developing me, but you have to get that development yourself. The company can offer you development programs and stretch programs, but you really need to think about what you want to get out of your career, and what you need to do to get there, and even ask line management, ask HR department what you need to do to progress. And if they say you need to get more skills broader in this area, then make sure you go and ask and do it. Because we all know that if you sit in the same job, you can't expect then to keep getting promoted again and again. You really do have to step outside of your comfort zone, get that extra experience, and make yourself very visible.
And actually, it's again coming back to something you talked about earlier, which was your career in teaching. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about allowing people to be their whole selves at work, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think your example there of the fact that your teaching career gave you skills and abilities that no one could have initially said to you, well, you're going to learn this and then you're going to go and use it in the recruitment industry. But what it demonstrates is that all of us have got other things we've done in our life that have built capabilities or built knowledge, and how important it is that we do draw on those in our work life as well, even if they're not part of our job description. And I think that's often why women that have had some time out, that have maybe sat on school boards or gone and run committees at school, or just the juggling of childcare, come actually back into the workplace. There's so many other skills, but we don't always acknowledge those, do we, or give ourselves the chance to draw on them. And you obviously have done that. You've come into the recruitment industry, but you've got this skill set that you've built up in other jobs or in other things you've done in your life, and you're drawing on all of those now, aren't you?
Yeah, and it's quite amazing actually when you think about where you're drawing from for that experience. And even if I think about doing a keynote speech, it's really daunting, isn't it? I don't think anybody goes onto a stage feeling 100%, oh, this is no problem, I can just wing it, I can get up and stand up and do whatever. You have to be nervous to do a good job, really. And I think the teaching side really helped me to think about how you present yourself, make sure you know exactly what you want to get through, what are your key objectives, and also how do you want people to perceive you, because every person in that audience takes something different away. So I think it's always thinking about you're not just going up there to deliver a slide deck, and then at the end of it be pleased that you got from the beginning to the end without falling off the stage. It's actually thinking about the message you want to deliver and what value the audience will get from that. And it was the same with teaching. What do you want those children to learn from that lesson? And then you evaluate at the end whether you actually achieved what you wanted to do.
And you talked about the one of the areas that was important to you was the ability to influence once you got into a board role. And being heard as a woman can often be a bit challenging, and it's one of the things I think people often talk about is how do you make sure your voice is heard. Have you any advice for the audience around how to make sure you do get heard and that you can be influential?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've been very fortunate in all of the in my colleagues at ManpowerGroup. I've never felt that because I was a woman I wouldn't be heard. I've never felt that bias at all. And I think that's probably quite unusual. And Manpower, actually, historically, they used to have all women on the board when I first joined the group. And then it went the other way and had more men on the board. So, it sort of switched. And now we've got 30% representation on the board. So, there's 3 women on a board of 10 now. So, although there's slightly lower percentage, I don't think any of us feel that we don't have a voice, and we don't have the time to speak and actually talk about what's important to us, our business and our brand. But I think the advice on that would be, if you are going to say something, make sure there's a reason and a background to what you want to deliver. So, I'm sure everybody would think of a time when you sat in a meeting and somebody's talking, and they're just talking, and we don't know what their point is, why they've stuck their hand up to say something. Maybe it's just so that they can say something. I think you're more credible if you speak when you've got a reason to speak, and when you've got something to deliver, or to agree with somebody and have a purpose for that. I think often we get caught in that trap of thinking you have to be vocal all of the time to be heard. Whereas often, if it's much more valuable if when you do speak, it's really important and it actually delivers a really good point.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'd agree. And you've also mentioned, Jill, about the importance of stepping out of your comfort zone. Have you got any stories there that you could share with us?
Quite a few keynote speeches are always stepping out of your comfort zone, aren't they? When you've got about 100 people just looking up at you to see what you've got to say, that's always interesting. But I think even, to leave ManpowerGroup and join another company, that was really daunting. And a lot of my colleagues at the time were saying, "Oh my goodness, how could you leave after 16 years?" And it was a leap of faith, really. But I think the key thing that I learned with that is always leave on a good note, and always make sure that you respect everybody around you and you treat them all as you would expect to be treated. And I think, I left on very good terms, and then was able to come back.
It's testimony, isn't it? The fact that you were able to come back is testimony to how you left.
Yeah.
And I bet Manpower got recognised as well, that they got back a Jill that had more than the Jill that probably had gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would absolutely agree with that. I'd learned more skills, and I was certainly more qualified than I had been before. But I think as far as stepping out your comfort zone, it's, if you really want to do something, try it, do it. Don't be held back because you worry about what will happen. It's much better to do something and think, oh, well, I've learned something, maybe it wasn't the right thing at the time, rather than to say, I should have done that, and to regret not doing it. I think you'll always learn something, whatever decision you make to step outside of your comfort zone. It's very rare that it doesn't work out. Yeah. And it's also, everybody will support you around you. When have you seen anybody get up to do a keynote speech, or, and people have been, cruel about it or critical? You might say, actually, here's some good learning points. You could do more of that or less of that. But, you don't, nobody's going to be that cruel to say that you didn't do a good job, are they?
Most of us sitting there thinking, thank goodness that's not me doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Involve the audience, and then that's the best way to make people feel uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah, good point. But actually, I think you were also probably quite brave going back to Manpower as well. And probably, thinking about leaving must have been quite a challenge, and I can imagine that after having been a long time where I was, it terrified me. But going back equally was probably also quite brave, I think, because you've been out for 3 years and you didn't maybe not quite know what you're going back to, but also being able to, to turn up again and say, hey, I'm back.
Yeah. Well, luckily I'd kept in touch with quite a few people. So, again, I think we have to remember that the recruitment world is a very small industry. And you really do need to make sure that you keep that network going, and you're respectful of people you've worked with in the past, and people who you may well work with in the future. You know, you might not always agree with them, but you know, we're at work, aren't we? We're not all a group of friends. It's working with colleagues and learning from different perspectives. So I think another key learning for me was to make sure that, you know, you remember the people who've helped you to get to the position that you're in,
Yes.
and then also help them and help other people through as well, and make sure that you share that knowledge. Because there's always that saying, isn't there? You know, be careful the way you treat people on the way up, because you'll meet them when you're on your way back
down. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No, and that's very true. And you know, you're absolutely right. I think those are really wise words. I'm going to ask you another question now, but I'm not sure if you have an answer to it, because it sounds like you've done a pretty good job at getting where you've got to. But I was going to ask you whether there was anything you wish you'd known about yourself as a person before you started your career, and which would have helped you if you'd worked it out sooner.
Yeah, I think you sort of look back at the way you were and think, there was often this view that if you wanted to be, you know, a woman in a senior leadership position, you had to be, you know, a really strong person who was actually quite mean, and, you know, a real force of nature. You know, I guess if you think about the, you know, Maggie Thatcher days, you know, the Iron Lady, and you had to be a certain way. But I actually think that you have that view of what you should be, but actually you don't have to be that. You should be true to yourself. And you know, if you get a lot of collaboration and a good team around you, that's far better than people worrying about, you know, what you say to your manager, or they're not going to like that. And you know, I think that leadership has changed dramatically. And I think one thing that I've learned as I've reported into different people is I've always learned more from people who've been more collaborative, and more authentic as you've worked together, rather than individuals who you were scared to knock on the door.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, I think when you're authentic, you create trust, don't you? Because it's clear that you're behaving in a way that's real and believable.
Yeah.
And I think yeah, it's very important as well, isn't it, to understand who you are in terms of your strengths. I think we spend, and I don't know if everybody's like this, but I think it's quite common that we focus on the things we're not so good at, and we worry all the time about what we're not good at, and the people around the table can do a few things better than us. And I don't know, it took me a long time actually to work out that I didn't have to keep worrying about the things that didn't come that easily to me, and that when I started to focus on the things I knew actually I could do and I could do well, it made me feel a lot better, and I think I contributed more. But did you identify in yourself any strengths, and how did you work out what it was that you were bringing to the table to leverage your position?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you think about where your strength is, and you know, it might be building relationships in your team, building relationships with your, you know, your business clients. I think you have to look at maybe the areas you're not feeling that you're as confident in or as strong in, and develop your team around those areas. So, you know, you should always use your team to make sure that you can fill those gaps where you feel you need that additional knowledge, and actually pull together to be a much stronger unit. You know, it may be that, you know, we all use our marketing departments or finance departments to support us in different ways. And, you know, those guys are brilliant, aren't they? You know, they're so good at what, you know, they've been employed to do. So we can't know everything all of the time. But if we have individuals within our teams who we can pull on with those strengths, then, you know, I think that's really the key.
And how did you work out what your own strengths were? Because often people say to me, you know, well, you know, what is it? You know, I don't know what it is that people see a value in me. Did you have a way of working out yourself what it was that you were, that was your, if you like, power of difference?
I think it's often getting feedback, isn't it?
Yeah.
And being open to that feedback. So I think, you know, getting your either your peers or your direct reports to actually do those 360 feedback exercises. And, you know, they can be anonymous if they want them to be anonymous as well, all depending how brave you are, whether you want to, you want to know who has fed back about you. I think it's really valuable to actually be able to take that constructive criticism and to listen to that. I always remember one time when I worked in retail, actually, I had a manager in a store, and you know, I was much younger at that time. I was about 21, and she used to say, I know exactly how the visit's going to go by the look on your face when you walk through the door. And, you know, as a young manager, you just don't realize the impact you have on a team or people. And that really made me think about that more. And I used to read a lot of the self-help books, and, you know, I'm sure you've done the same, Natasha. And there was a book about a fish market in New York. Yeah? And years ago, and everybody had read it, and it was all, and I remember one part of that book and one chapter was about choose your attitude. And that's really stuck with me all these years, to say, you know, however you feel, if you've had a bad day or you haven't slept because, you know, a baby's been up all night, or, you know, you've had an argument with somebody, when you walk through that door, you need to put all of that behind and leave that at home. You know, you need to walk through there and do your job and motivate your team, and actually make sure that they feel valued and supported.
It's interesting again that you say that, because I used to observe that even the simplest things, like just someone in the morning coming in and saying good morning, and when they left at night saying goodbye, see you tomorrow, just absolutely started and ended the day with a tone that was so very different if they just walked out and not said anything. So you're right. And I do remember that story. Now I'm racking my brains to remember what the book was called, but yes,
I can't remember either, but it was really popular, wasn't it? Everybody used to
probably have it on my bookshelf somewhere. I'll be searching it out later, but it was a great book, actually, because you're right, it really focused on, even if you weren't doing anything different to your competition in terms of activity, the service and the emotion and the feeling that you created in the experience of engaging with them could be your USP effectively, couldn't it? So thank you for reminding us of that. I just would like to remind the audience as well, we've got a few more minutes left, so if you have got any more questions to ping through, please could you do that shortly, so we make sure we put them all to Jill before we go. And Jill, we've got a question here asking what's next for you.
Oh gosh. World domination, no. Well, to try and get out of lockdown would be a start, wouldn't it? So I lead our talent solutions brand for ManpowerGroup, and actually we've just launched that brand over the last 2 months. So what's next for me is making that brand, you know, really evident in the marketplace, and developing that with the European and the global teams, to make sure that, you know, our business covers all of our workforce solutions. And we're also working very closely with one of our other brands, Right Management, which is more around outplacement work and leadership development. So it's developing the brand and making sure that we continue to grow, and also making sure that we focus not just on our traditional practices of buying and borrowing talent, but also focusing on how we build and bridge talent. As an organisation, how do we support people to reskill, to upskill, and work with outside organisations to make sure that we bring people through? Because we all know we've got challenges with Brexit, with IR35, and also with, you know, people who've actually had really hard times, you know, in hospitality industry, retail industry, throughout COVID. So it's a real focus of ours to make sure we can upskill and reskill people to get them into the right roles.
Quite a purposeful ambition as well, which is nice, I imagine.
Yeah, feel like you're adding value, don't you, and doing something that's meaningful. Yeah.
And is there anyone that inspires you at the moment, Jill? Another question.
Do you know, I've thought about this quite a lot.
I hate this question.
No, and And it's such a big word. Somebody inspires you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you think,
Mm.
and I have racked my brains on this one, Natasha. And you know, I actually think that I couldn't name one person that has inspired me, but what I could say is I've seen a lot of leaders, you know, not just recruitment leaders, but world leaders, you know, industry leaders who influence me more. So who I can take part of what they do and think that's really important, and we really need to learn from that and reflect it in whatever we do. And
Mm.
you know, you could mention, you know, obvious people like you know, Theresa May, for example. I mean, she went through an awful time, didn't she?
Yeah.
And there she is, still on the back benches, having a say, and you just think, you know, good on you, somebody who's been through all of
Mhm.
that adversity, but she's still there, true to her cause, and you know, and pushing her opinion forward, whether you agree with her politics or not. You know, it's somebody who's really shown a strong resolve.
Mm.
And people like that, for me, really, Natasha, I
Yeah.
think take part. I mean, you know, you can look at really inspirational people like Elon Musk, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
he's incredible. But you know, there are lots of parts to his makeup and the way he works that you wouldn't agree with.
No, and you must find this too, Jill. I mean, I personally find it incredibly inspiring often when I'm working with some of the new talent in the industry that's coming in with fresh thinking and new ideas, and I take a lot of inspiration actually from the
Yeah.
energy and new thinking that I see coming through many of the businesses that I'm working for. And you must find that too with the talent in Manpower that you work with.
Definitely. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, a lot of the you know, Generation Z guys who are coming through, you know, they've got great ideas. And, you know, I think we all have to learn from, you know, the fact that things are going to be different. We're not going to have those traditional workplaces anymore. And it often their flexibility in the way they think about things can really help us all make sure that we're all future proof and we're all more credible in the future. Because, you know, I think we all have to keep reskilling, you know, us included. We have to keep learning and we have to keep moving forward. And the
Mm.
pace of change is just incredible now, isn't it?
It is, you're right. Well, thank you, Jill. That's the audience's questions and mine, very answered in a very lovely way and very clearly. And thank you so much for sharing what's been an amazing journey and one that's clearly not over yet. And it's always, you know, you talked about authenticity and the importance of that, and you've got a lovely demeanor about yourself, and it's quite clear why you've succeeded and done well. And we've got lots of people now pinging messages through to say thank you so much. It's been really fabulous to hear what you've had to say, and it's been great to meet you, Jill, because we've never met before either. And
Yeah, and you.
that's
Thank you,
wonderful part for me of doing these webinars is I get to meet some other great people who inspire me too. So thank you, and thank you to our audience for joining today. We'll be back for our last webinar of the year on November the 27th for the last of our Speak Up Stand Out series. So I hope to see you all back then. Thank you and have a really lovely weekend. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.